while ago, we did a video all about the Canon RF Trinity of zoom lenses, specifically the f2.8 lenses. But you know what doesn't get talked about enough? You know what doesn't get the recognition it deserves? And that's f4 lenses, especially when you're talking about a trinity of f4 lenses. Now, Canon have sent me 3 f4 zoom lenses. We've got the 14 to 35, we've got the 24 to 105, we've got the 70 to 200, all f4 and all capable of taking really beautiful images. And Canon sent them to me to kind of play around with them, test them out. They sent me an R6 as well. And I want to talk about what makes these lenses special, what makes f4 lenses special, and how actually sometimes we can get really carried away with that aperture, with that maximum aperture. And maybe that's not always what matters the most when it comes to both our lenses, but also our images as well. Now let's talk about that aperture to begin with. So f4 obviously is a maximum aperture. It's not going to be as bright as f2.8, and it's not going to give you as shallow a depth of field as f2.8 will give you as well. But that's really where it ends, right? It's still great optical quality, but that aperture is just not quite as wide, not quite as big as f2.8. Does that matter? Well, it depends on what kind of stuff you're going for. Obviously, 2.8 is great for letting in more light. So in low light, that's going to really help. But these days, that doesn't matter as much. Cameras like the R6, the R5, even back to the EOS R, I remember being blown away by how just ridiculously well that camera was able to take higher ISO values, which eliminates some of that low light problem of shooting f4 rather than f2.8. I mean, you're talking about one stop of light. So you would have to double your ISO or halve your shutter speed to achieve the same amount of light, to achieve the same exposure at f4 as you would at f2.8. But these days, like I say, it's not the end of the world. Shooting at ISO 6400 instead of 3200 doesn't matter nearly as much as it may have done 5 or even 10 years ago, when noise would have been really quite severe. That would have been a big problem. So that's maybe not as much of a problem as it maybe initially feels like it might be when you first start thinking about f4 lenses. Now, the other side of it is that aperture and that shallow depth of field. f2.8 is going to give you a more shallow depth of field effect to your wide open aperture photo. So whether that's a portrait, whether that's focusing in on something reasonably close, you're going to get a shallow depth of field with f2.8 than f4. That's just kind of a matter of fact. There's nothing you can really do about that. But something that I've really learnt on my photographic journey, and something that I really notice with other people learning photography and kind of coming into these lenses, is we start out very obsessed with these wide open apertures. The first time you buy a prime lens, let's say it's a nifty 50 mm f1.8, you pop it on f1.8, you take a picture, it looks amazing because you've never had that shallow depth of field before, that blurry background. You get a nice portrait lens, an 85mm f1.4. Oh, that is going to give you some beautiful, beautiful portraits with a nice blurred out background. You even get a bit of fall off with the focus coming back towards the ears. But that's not the only way to take a portrait, and that's not the only way to take a photo in general. And sometimes, in fact, probably a lot of the time, your photo might be better served with a slightly deeper depth of field, and maybe stopping down to something like f4 or even beyond, f5.6, f8, something like that. And I think that takes a little while to get out of that mode of being obsessed with this shallow depth of field and obsessed with this wide open aperture. But once you do, you realize that lenses like these f4 lenses actually provide you still great opportunity, even to take things like portraits. So for example, 24 to 105, now this is the RF version. I use the EF version of this lens, the Mark II EF 24-105 f4, so much. It is crazy how much I use that lens, including for portraits, and not just of friends and stuff like that. I did actually use that lens for headshots and for portraits, for lifestyle shots in particular, for clients as well, because it offers a really, really lovely look to your photo, especially if you shoot at f4. If you zoom to 105, even to 85mm, you're gonna get some really good lens compression. You're still gonna get a nice blurred background, but you're gonna have nice detail and nice sharpness on your subject and across the whole photo. f4, there's only very specific circumstances when you might actually want to shoot something like f1.4 or something like that to get that really blurred out effect, because that's gonna give you a very kind of ethereal, dreamlike look to your photo. Yes, it looks stunning, but it's not the be all and end all, especially when it comes to things like portraits. You can absolutely get a great effect with something like this, but it also allows you to capture, more of the environment, more detail around your subject. And that's why I used to use it all the time for lifestyle photos, for those slightly wider portraits, or I'd pull back and zoom to get a bit more lens compression, but still have some detail around my subject. And I really, really like that. That's definitely the case here with the 70-200 as well. It's able to get you some really lovely lens compression and blur if you want it, but you can also get some beautiful detail on your subjects, whether that be landscape, whether that be wildlife, whatever it might be. You can get some lovely stuff with the 70-200. 14-35, I really don't think that it needs to be much faster than f4, to be honest, apart from if I was shooting astro, where obviously you want the nice fast aperture. I generally, when it comes to using a lens of this kind of focal range, will stop down to f4, f5.6, f8 anyway, because I think it offers me kind of the depth of field and the look that I'm going for with a lens like this. I'm very rarely trying to capture bokeh and beautiful out of focus areas with a 14-35. So with the initial conversation of aperture out of the way, I think that's the biggest hurdle for these lenses. Let's talk about some of the things that are great about these lenses, and the two things that spring to mind immediately. The first one is the weight. I mean, these are unbelievably lightweight and easy to carry around. I had these 3 lenses with this camera in my camera bag, going out and about, hiking all over the place to try and take photos. Admittedly, while I've had these, I've not had the best weather, to be fair, but I didn't feel the weight at all in my bag. It was incredibly lightweight and easy to take these around. It means they are incredibly hand-holdable. Yes, they are external zooms, but they handle really well. And that lightweight feel is a big deal, which is obviously achievable through the RF mount, but also f4 is going to make them lighter weight. And they're also pretty small actually for what they are, which I really like. And the other side of things, which I think is great about these lenses, is the price. Now, they're not as expensive as the f2.8 versions. And I mean, something like the 24-105, I used to keep this, or the EF Mark II equivalent of this, on the front of my camera 99% of the time, because whatever I was shooting, I could just use the 24-105 because it's got such a versatile focal range, and f4 is still absolutely fine. In fact, I actually did shoot astrophotography with an f4 lens. I'll pop an image up. Admittedly, it wasn't one of these RF lenses, but it gives you an idea of what you can actually achieve with that f4 aperture. You're still able to achieve an awful lot. But that price is not something to be kind of ignored. You can get all 3 of these lenses for a much cheaper price than the f2.8. Now, I admit, if you're a pro, if you're doing work with these lenses, then the f2.8 versions are probably gonna be the one for you. But the f4 versions offer you great image quality, great handling, especially if you shoot video as well. These are fantastic because a lot of the time you might want to shoot your video as something like f4, so that you get a little bit more room for error with the focus, but also a little bit more kind of sharpness and detail and stuff like that. f4 can be a great kind of aperture to shoot a lot of general video at, because it gives you a little bit of that deeper depth of field, so you're not having too much fall off when it comes to focus. These 3 lenses are all great options for all of that, but at that lower price point. So really all you're sacrificing there is a bit of brightness and that depth of field as well. Now, I'm not going to pretend that if price is no option, I would buy the f2.8 versions. I'm not crazy, right? I'm going to enjoy the f2.8 versions. I can always stop down to f4, but these are a fantastic option. And they give you, especially if you're either an up and coming photographer or videographer, or you want to use these for personal stuff as well as maybe client work or even just personal stuff, these might be the better option than to plump for the f2.8 versions, kind of spend all your budget on that. You could get something like this, plus a prime lens or something like that, and you fill out your lens collection a little bit more than just going for the f2.8 versions. That's something definitely to be considered when it comes to these. I'd love to know your thoughts though. f2.8, f4, how do you feel about it? What do you own? And what do you think about what we've been talking about here? Do you think there's other differences that we've really missed? Do you think there's other things to consider that I've not mentioned in this video? Pop all of your thoughts down in the comments because I love reading through all of that. Of course, you can check out all of these lenses by following the link down in the description. You can, of course, like and subscribe as well if you enjoyed the video. That really helped me out. But of course, until next time, as always, thanks for watching.